The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. It is Friday, and it is the 3rd of February. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick little program note, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 to give us her unique perspective on the world. Now, as you've probably been hearing, there's been a terror incident at the Louvre in Paris, France. Apparently there was this man wielding a machete screaming "Aloha snack bar" or whatever it is that they shout over there, and a French soldier guarding the Louvre shot the man and seriously injured him. And it's being declared an act of terror. And so, of course, my question to Francois Hollande is, how is that open borders idea working out for you so far? Now, as you know, this weekend is the Super Bowl, and security is going to be very, very tight. Houston police are a little concerned over negative reactions to Donald Trump's immigration plans, or let me rephrase that, illegal immigration plans. And there's also, of course, the concern about terrorism. Somebody actually did a movie about that idea many years ago called Black Sunday, where they hijacked the Goodyear blimp and filled it with explosives. So it's not an idea that is entirely brand new. So there's going to be a lot of security. They're going to have Black Hawk helicopters flying around the stadium to make sure that aircraft stay away. It's a no-fly zone, obviously. And they're going to have a lot of hardware up there. And hopefully the game is going to proceed and everybody's going to have a good time and there won't be any ugly incidents. But obviously it is a symbolic target of high value. Now, getting on back up to the riots in Berkeley, a lot of new developments are starting to come out of there. And according to Milo's security coordinator, the Berkeley police had been told, you will not arrest anybody. There was a no-arrest policy. And in this article, basically, Berkeley professor Robert Rice said that these guys were not students. The guys dressed in the black, they're anarchists from out of town. They're the same people who shut down UC Davis. They're the same people that created chaos at the University of Washington in Seattle. This is a paid crew. Apparently they were also at the inauguration. They don't change their clothes or disguises. And people are looking at photos and saying, okay, there they are. Now, a story coming out of Rumor Mill News, apparently a lot of the Berkeley students have now gone on Twitter saying that these were outsiders. There weren't students over there. They're giving the campus a bad name, giving the student body a bad image. And this is another confirmation these were paid outside agitators. Now, apparently the FBI has opened an investigation into the mayor of Berkeley, Jesse Aruguen, who ordered police to stand down during that whole mess last Wednesday. So this was a staged event. It's another staged event. California's lieutenant governor is out there saying he supports the rioters and it's all Milo's fault. And Democratic Representative Val Dennings in Congress was saying the Berkeley riots are a beautiful sight because we're getting the young people to push our agenda against somebody that we don't like. Now, it was 7 years ago, this week, when UC Irvine, part of that same university system, persecuted Muslim students, the Irvine 11, for daring to exercise their religious, ethnic, academic, and First Amendment rights when they protested the Israeli ambassador at a UC Irvine event. So all this talk about openness and inclusion and tolerance and everything, it's very selective. We want you to be tolerant of the people we like, and we're going to come down hard on the people that we don't like. So there's all kinds of nonsense out there. Now, what did they actually accomplish last Wednesday by doing what they did? What did they actually accomplish? People are Googling Milo. His book sales soared 12,000% overnight. He gained 200,000 likes on his Facebook page in a single day. So, yeah, that'll teach him. That'll teach him to have an opinion. And apparently less than 24 hours after those Wednesday night riots, 2 more men attacked a Trump supporter just walking to class. Guy was wearing a Make America Great Again cap, and apparently a white SUV drove up to him. 2 men came on out screaming at him and beat him. Now, fortunately, there was a witness, and the police arrived, and they identified and arrested these guys. But, I mean, part of the problem of all this liberal snowflake buttercup behavior is it's sending out a message that this sort of thing is now acceptable behavior in the United States of America, and I don't think anybody really wants to see that become a widespread idea. Now, we're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network, and they're not stopping with UC Berkeley because apparently last night protesters gathered to protest Vice Media co-founder Gavin McInnes, who was inside NYU holding a seminar for the school's college Republicans. And they came on up and did a huge ruckus. Unlike Berkeley, the police were arresting people. They arrested a total of 11. And apparently one of the NYU professors was screaming profanity at the New York Police Department. Now, NYU is a $70,000 a year college. Would you send your kid there when the professors are clearly displaying symptoms of mental instability? Just not working very well here. Now, Paul Joseph Watts is out there with a very cogent observation. If Hillary Clinton had won the election, we'd all be complaining about her cabinet picks, just like everybody's complaining about Donald Trump's cabinet picks. The difference is we wouldn't be physically attacking her supporters. That is the difference with what's going on here right now. Now, the Democrats are actually starting to wonder if maybe this constant screaming and crying and whining and violence might actually be hurting the party's image. Yeah, it is, and they're way, way too late. The damage is already done because they're out there screaming and crying regular as clockwork every 12 hours, and they're starting to look like the party of perpetual outrage. Maybe they'll start toning it down here. By the way, we found a video that we posted at WhatReallyHappened.com, where back in 2015, while she was on the campaign trail, Hillary Clinton bragged about how she voted in favor of building a wall to keep out illegal immigrants. Nobody rioted back then, did they? It's all very selective. It's all staged here. Now, in Austin, Texas, City Council member Gregorio Cesar is basically urging the illegal immigrants not to cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He even went so far as to release an infographic on ways illegal immigrants can defy federal law enforcement. That puts him in violation of Title VIII. Now, the Democrats, of course, who stayed away from Trump's inauguration, are not through expressing their displeasure. As you know, Trump has a speech to Congress coming on up, and the Democrats are saying they're going to have protests. They're going to load up the audience with people who are going to be harmed by what they assume Trump's actions are going to be. They're going to refuse to shake his hands. The childishness of our government is just astounding. These people like to present themselves as the best of the best, that they are our politicians and our rulers and our leaders because they're superior human beings. They certainly do not act like it. They really do not act like it. And Barack Obama is still out there. The Obamas have now moved into their multi-million-dollar Washington, D.C. home, not all that far from the White House. Everybody thought the Obamas were going to be living here in Hawaii, and instead they're living in Washington, D.C., and it looks like Obama is going to be very actively confronting Donald Trump. Now, traditionally, outgoing presidents will wait a year before they will comment on their successor. Obama ignored that. Less than 2 weeks and he's out there screaming. Now, one of the things we have to keep in mind is Trump's immigration ban is for 90 days only, while more strict vetting procedures are put in place. And Trump's immigration ban does not specifically target Muslims. It targets specific countries known to be hotbeds of terrorism. And if you are in one of those countries, it doesn't matter whether you are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, Pastafarian, or an atheist, you're going to have the same difficulty coming into the United States. It is not religious discrimination. And all of this is based on a law that goes back 65 years. Now, the GOP is getting ready to push a new law that would change the rules for a 501c3 that would allow political activities by churches. Now, up until now, it is a violation of their tax-exempt status for churches to engage in any kind of political activities, to advocate a candidate, to advocate a particular position on any ballot measure. And the GOP is now saying, well, it's time to take that off and start using the churches as political propagandists. Obviously, this would favor the GOP over the Democrats here. Now, here's something that's really, really interesting. And this story is in a couple of different places. It's in the Daily Mail. And now they're out there saying that fake news did not have any effect on the election. A study by NYU and Stanford says that hardly anybody was reading the independent media. Hardly anybody was reading the stories about Hillary Clinton and Travelgate and cattle futures. Really, they had no influence whatsoever. I mean, only a few weeks ago, they were screaming the independent media was part of the Russian propaganda machine trying to cheat Hillary out of the White House, and today they're trying to claim that we're irrelevant. What's going on here is the corporate media is desperate to regain the image, if not the reality, that they're still in control. They're afraid their financial backers are going to say, why am I wasting money on you when you cannot steer the opinions of America anymore? And so this is the corporate media saying, oh, no, we're still in control of the minds of America. And by doing so, in a way, they're having to admit Hillary was simply not liked by the voters. They're throwing the blame for Hillary's loss back onto Hillary to save themselves, is what's going on here. But we need to remember NYU is not exactly somebody we should be accepting as a definitive source. First of all, because of that NYU professor who was shouting profanities at the police during this protest last night. And NYU has also been fully on board human-caused global warming. And that just because it's cold where you are, you've got no reason for doubt. They've got a whole climate department. They're publishing papers out there fully in support of Al Gore's agenda. Now, over at Stanford, they have a heavily funded solar center. And their scientists are publishing papers saying there never was a pause. Human-caused global warming is continuing, and it's real. So like all these other universities, they're for sale to the highest bidder for whatever propaganda that you want. And it's not like Stanford has a really good reputation, because back in 2015, their business school was rocked by this huge sex scandal involving the dean of the business school and two professors who were married, obviously not to each other or to the dean here. None of these institutions should be trusted. Anytime somebody comes on out and says Stanford or NYU says this, go back and do a Google search and find out what other propaganda they're also supporting before you decide whether or not you're going to trust what they're saying. Because this whole claim that nobody was influenced by the independent media is a complete reversal from just a couple of weeks ago. And it's obviously being done for the corporate media to save face and to try and convince their financial backers that, oh yes, they're really still in control. They still have the trust of the audience out there. I smell desperation and panic out there. Now, Moscow is criticizing Reuters because Reuters apparently came on out with allegations where Russia is imposing control, censorship, prosecution, visa denials, and physically threatening Reuters journalists. And Russia has come on back and said either document that or clarify your your complaints, because it does look like more of the gratuitous bashing of Russia. And when you look at all the recent attacks on Russia today, Reuters is definitely the pot calling the kettle black here. Now, First Lady Melania Trump has been the victim of another fake news story. U.S. Weekly reported that Melania was thinking about actually staying in New York and never moving to Washington, D.C. to be with her husband. And, oh, my goodness, there must be something wrong with their marriage, and it's horrible, and it's going on, and why she may never move to the White House. And, of course, what we're finding out is that, in point of fact, Melania Trump will move to the White House as soon as Barron Trump ends his school this year, and she's already hired a former Bush staffer to be her chief of staff. So once again, the corporate media is out there just making up anything they think will convince the public to be unsympathetic to the president. Now, we're hearing also that at least 2 high-level Secret Service agents, in fact, they're described as managers, have been removed from the grounds of the White House for some undisclosed security reason. Now, maybe these were the managers who were in charge when people managed to get inside the White House. There was that incident where somebody fired a shot at the White House, and it wasn't even discovered for 2 to 3 days afterwards, and only then by the cleaning crew. Maybe Trump just got rid of those. We don't really know what's going on there. Now, over in France, it looks like the scandal about a fake job for Fillon's wife is scuttling his chances, and it looks like the road is clear for Marine Le Pen to become France's next president. And, of course, she is promising a Frexit. Turning over here to the war zones, apparently the Syrian army is recapturing key gas fields in eastern Homs. Now, the U.S.-backed rebels, the various groups, have been relying on being able to steal oil and gas from Syria and selling it for part of their funding, and now that is being cut off. So that's a good thing. Now, I'm going to concede here that Donald Trump's tough talk against Russia, China, and Iran is extremely troubling. Yes, I'm happy with some of the things he's done with regards to his campaign promises, but he did promise in his campaign we were going to go back to being friends with China and Russia, and all this tough talk is very, very alarming. And I'm mentioning it now, but we're going to put this off until the third hour because Claire has got her own opinions about what's going on. And so we're going to be getting into that in a little bit more detail in hour number 3. Now, Iran is out there basically saying they're not going to cave into useless threats. The missile test they carried out, they understand to be in compliance with international law and the UN resolutions. And they're going to continue testing. And Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif explained what's going on. Because for 8 long years, when Iraq was making war on Iran at the behest of the United States, Iran was being showered with U.S.-provided missiles, and they had no way to fight back. And they went to the international community and said, can you please find some way to help us defend our people from these missiles that are coming on in, some of which are carrying chemical weapons. And everybody turned them down. Well, what's Iran supposed to do? Sit there utterly defenseless if another Saddam shows up? Of course not. And Iran is saying this threat of the sanctions is the U.S. trying to get them to leave themselves defenseless in exchange for a few bucks. And they're not going to go for that. More about that when we come right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Hang on a sec. I need a new mixer here. All right. Now, we're talking about Iran's Foreign Minister, Javad Zarif, is saying, look, we have a right to defend ourselves, and we have to develop our defenses, because when Iraq was waging war against Iran at the behest of the United States, we were not able to defend ourselves. Nobody came to our assistance. Obviously, we have a right to have a defensive military. I mean, it's just common sense. And the sanctions have been around for so long that Iran is already used to living with them. Now, remember when Trump did his ban against several nations, and Iran was one of them, Iran threatened to drop the U.S. dollar for oil. And that is a real threat. Unlike these mythical nuclear weapons that are being wagged at us, if Iran starts selling their oil for currencies other than the dollar, it further erodes the petrodollar and accelerates the decline of the American economy. And these new sanctions appear to have been the trigger that pushed them over because they have now officially set the date. March 21st, Iran is going to stop using the U.S. dollar. And if you look at all the other countries that have stopped using the dollar for cross-border trade and banking, you can understand how dire the situation is. And the reality is, just as was the case with Iraq, and just as the ongoing case with Syria, we are being sold a war with Iran on the basis of lies. Now, first of all, you need to remember that this missile they tested was a medium-range missile. It's not a missile that is in any way, shape, or form connected with a nuclear threat. It's not an ICBM. It can't reach all the way over to Europe or the United States. It is a defensive missile with a conventional warhead. And you need to keep that in mind, because what they're trying to say is that Iran does not have a right to have defensive conventional missiles in their arsenal. And that, of course, is ridiculous. Every single country on earth has defensive weapons. It's nonsense. And I think it really is getting ridiculous because Sean Spicer came on out in a press conference and accused Iran of attacking a U.S. Navy vessel, saying it's an act of war. Unless, of course, it's Israel attacking the USS Liberty, and then, of course, it's not an act of war and everybody should shut the heck up. But this was such an absolute piece of nonsense. Major Garrett of CBS News corrected him, saying it was actually a Saudi vessel. And Spicer said, yeah, it was a Saudi vessel, but didn't back off this idea that Iran was somehow committing an act of war against the United States. And even worse, there is now talk about how because of the Iranian-backed Houthis attacks on the Saudi vessel, that they're now justified in unprovoked attacks on Iranian boats. And this is really ridiculous, because let's go and look at the situation in Yemen. Saudi Arabia has been carrying out war against Yemen for years, again at the behest of the United States. Why don't the Houthis have a right to fight back and attack the ships that are blockading their coast and preventing them from getting food and supplies for their people? It's an absolutely ridiculous idea that a nation that is trying to defend itself is somehow in the wrong. And talk about Orwellian talk here. All right, let's grab a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. That's funny, Major Garrett. Another revolving door parrot for the media, huh? Going from Fox to CBS. They back and forth all over each other. Megyn Kelly to NBC. What a joke, huh?
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, on Trump with the cutting funds, if he's going to do it, he's got to do it all at once, so it doesn't give the other sanctuary cities a time to readjust. He needs to make one blanket cutting of federal funds off, because this buttercup snowflake thing is beyond this point now. The extremist element of that party has taken over.
You're absolutely right. Listen, I'm going to put you on hold. Don't hang up. We're going to bring you back right after these few words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. And, Dustin, you had something you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, like I said, there's no snowflakes and buttercups anymore. These extremist elements have taken over. And if you look, not the word from Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, who are the dinosaurs of the party, no Obama, no Hillary Clinton. This is Hillary Clinton's purple revolution, and they're not going to stop, Mike. It's going to be death from 1,000 paper cuts. These people are just going to keep doing this and doing this and doing this. Cut California off the whole fund for the whole state, And anybody who wants to leave and the Hollywood people want to come over to Trump's side, we'll open Movie Land in Texas.
Well, there's already a movie industry in Texas. There's a big one over in Florida. But these days, most movies and TV shows are actually made outside the United States. Hollywood is no longer the center of filmmaking, and that was even true back when I was still in the industry. But getting on back to what you were saying, yeah, this is George Soros at work, and again, we're hearing from Berkeley. These were outside agitators who were brought on in to cause this ruckus, and they're going to start losing support because, like I mentioned in that other article, the Democratic Party is now saying this is making us look bad. It's causing more harm than good. They're not going to be able to reverse the election. They're not going to be able to grab power until at least 2018 in the midterms, and they're not going to be able to go after Donald Trump until 2020. And they're starting to realize this is backfiring on them for the reasons I was describing yesterday. They're not winning the support of the general public. They're not getting popular support for what they're doing. It's working the other way. So we're going to see the Democrats kind of like distance themselves from it, and it's just going to be the outside agitators and George Soros and whoever on else. So this color revolution is already stumbling very, very, very badly. And just like those Berkeley students who are saying it's making the student body and our university look bad, all of this is making the entire United States look bad to the rest of the world. They're seeing us as an empire clearly in decline, like ancient Rome.
Hey, did you check out the front of the Drudge Report? It's just Der Spiegel and the Village. It shows on the Village front of that magazine or ragazine, shows a picture of Donald Trump, and it says, "Why not?" It shows a bullet like hitting his head.
Oh,
like a bullet.
That is.
Yeah,
that's disgusting.
That's what these people have become. Like this is how dangerous these people have become. And if you notice, it's getting worse. I mean,
it's getting worse in the media around the world and in the media here in the United States. But again, I'm not getting a sense that they're getting the popular support. I've gotten a lot of emails from people who are very concerned over how chaotic things seem to be, but they're not sympathetic to all these rioters and all these people talking about coups and assassinations and revolutions. They're not getting it. And at least not the artificial one that they're obviously planning for. This is shaping up to be a repeat of Iran 2009.
And Mike, switching real quick, if I can, on Russia and Syria, where you said, the Syrians have taken back some of the oil facilities. If you notice, remember when Russia bombed a lot of oil, so that kept the revenue from getting to ISIS. So that was a smart move by knocking out their revenue generator.
Oh, absolutely.
So even though they did damage to obviously the facilities, that can be rebuilt. But to cut off the revenue is the first step, into stopping the flow of money or oil leaving into Turkey.
In any war, the side that runs out of money first is the side that loses. But Russia wasn't bombing the actual refineries and oil fields. They were bombing the smuggling convoys that were taking the oil into Turkey.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, thanks a lot. We're going to let you go here. Now then, everyone is still talking about that raid into Yemen that was horribly botched. It is becoming more and more obvious somebody leaked the raid to Al-Qaeda to turn it into a disaster, and of course the corporate media is blaming Donald Trump for it. As it turns out, this raid was actually planned months ago by the Obama administration. And yes, Donald Trump gave the go-ahead for the mission shortly after taking office, but at this point it looks like somebody said, here, we need to do a strike in Yemen. And Donald Trump didn't do his due diligence, and he signed it off, and now the media, of course, is trying to put the blame for all of it at his feet, just like they did at Jimmy Carter when the attempt to rescue the Iranian hostages failed. But right now we can see the deep state's logic on all of this thing. Bomb Afghanistan, bomb Iraq, bomb Syria, bomb Libya, bomb Yemen, and say the Muslims are the terrorists. That's what we're getting from all of this stuff. Now, one thing that's particularly alarming to me is our new UN envoy, Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, is up there at the United Nations screaming Crimea is a part of Ukraine, And the Russian sanctions related to Crimea will remain in place until Russia returns control of the peninsula to Ukraine. Very, very, very firm line. And this is very worrying, and it does reinforce my view that Trump's greatest weakness is his naivete and his assumption that the world really is like what he was shown on TV by corporate media. Now, Trump does know corporate media lied about him, but apparently he has not had the time to sit back and say, gee, I wonder what else they were distorting and misrepresenting. And he needs to go through that exercise or we're in trouble, because if Donald Trump winds up not significantly altering the current course the United States is on, he may very well prove to be the last president of the United States of America. And I don't think he wants that in the history books at all. Now, Moscow has come on back talking about this decision to adjust sanctions against Russia, and they're lowballing it. And they're saying, well, it's, Americans are being pragmatic, but we need to understand that the sanctions are selective. They're going to go for the sanctions that are advantageous to them, and they're not going to be really doing any sanctions that might harm them. And he said a good example of that, of course, is that the United States is still buying rocket engines from Russia, because the United States still can't make reliable rocket engines. They forgot how to do that years ago. They got used to buying rocket engines from Russia, and they're still going to go on doing it. What are they going to do? Ground all of our satellites and missions up into space? Of course not. It's political theater more than real economic wars here. Meanwhile, Songbird McCain is out there screaming, it's time for the U.S. to send weapons to Ukraine. They're just so hot and bothered to start that war. And the way they're going, they could still get it and stick Donald Trump with it. But it's, like I said, I'm alarmed about some of this tough talk coming out of Trump's administration. We're going to talk about that in detail in the third hour. Meanwhile, Russia is saying that the biggest threat to the European Union is not Donald Trump. It is, in fact, Germany. And they're responding to comments made by the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, who declared Donald Trump the major external threat to the European Union. And Russia is saying Donald Trump hasn't done anything to the EU. He's not threatening to do anything to the EU. Meanwhile, do you remember at the end of World War II, and one of the terms of the Nazi surrender, was that Germany would never be allowed to rearm, because they have this bad habit of when they get weapons, they start wars. Or they get into wars, to be more accurate. And today, Germany has 400,000 men in arms, and they're moving tanks into Lithuania. They're already playing that Sudetenland game again. You have to look at where the threat is really coming from, not what the corporate media and the politicians are saying it is. Russia, meanwhile, is starting to warn Serbia to boost up their borders in preparation for a possible U.S.-induced attack from Albania to try and kick off war in Europe and war against Russia. All right, let's see. Kiev forces have launched another heavy shelling of a village in the south part of Donetsk Republic. They are openly defying the UN Security Council's demand to return to the ceasefire. The United Nations is saying the fighting is very, very heavy around the Avdiivka area, and both sides are losing a lot of forces. It's all on out. All right, let's see. Let's take some phone calls. Mike in Brazil, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. First of all, I need to say that I agree 100% with Dustin from New Jersey. He's absolutely correct. These people will not give up until they achieve their goals.
Or until George Soros goes broke. Or he's arrested. And a lot of people are already talking about that, because he's already violated a huge number of U.S. laws with all of this funding of riots and protests. He's in violation of the USA Patriot Act.
It's an established fact, Mike, that he's behind every one of these riots that have taken place in the past few months. And my question is, and I tweeted a lot about this, why isn't a commission to investigate George Soros for sedition and for inciting a coup. Literally, he's inciting a coup by financing these thugs. And like you said, all these people at Berkeley, most of them were just hired hands to do the job for Soros. Now, the question is, why isn't the AG going after this guy, freeze his assets, put the handcuffs on him, and I guarantee you that all these riots will evaporate.
Well, let me give you one thing that everybody has to keep in mind, okay? And that is, right now, Donald Trump and all of his nominees are still in confirmation cycle. And we need to be very cautious about, first of all, what the nominees are saying before the committees and ultimately before the Senate. And we need to be looking at Donald Trump's actions in terms of the fact that Donald Trump still needs to woo the Congress to confirm his nominees. And so these nominees and Donald Trump himself are probably saying and doing the things they think the Congress wants to hear and see done. And I think the true measure of what Donald Trump is going to be about is going to happen after he gets all the confirmation sorted out and he's got his administration locked into place. And that is something we need to keep in mind. And going after Soros right now would alienate the Congress, and they would absolutely stonewall the rest of his confirmations.
The guy is a real menace. I mean, he's a national security risk.
He is.
It's not just me saying this. People in Europe also comment on the actions of George Soros and his funding of extreme elements in the left-wing parties of Europe. He's doing there the same thing he's trying to do in the U.S.
Well, some of these other countries are already. Russia's already shut him down. Hungary's going after him. Macedonia's going after him. Serbia's going after him. This is really spreading all over the globe. At some point, it's going to have to show up here. But I'll tell you, it may not need to, because George Soros' ambition is a global government. And as the European Union falls apart and he is cut off from playing his games in country after country, there's going to be a day where he's going to look in the mirror and say, I can't make this work in the years I have remaining. And at that point, he's going to pull the plug. And he's going to say, I'm going to stop wasting all my money on this. I'm obviously not going to achieve what I want to achieve. And then all the paid protesters are going to go away.
Yeah, one last point I was going to make. I don't know if you read the news about the Germans buying illegal firearms to protect themselves from the Muslim invaders. And apparently there is a website from where they acquired the weapons and ammunition. And this has the EU officials really worried because it looks like the incipient phase of a civil war, which undoubtedly, if they don't roll back these open border policies, they will end up literally fighting a civil war.
They could start a civil war here in the United States if they don't back off all this nonsense. But look at it from the point of view of the people in Germany or any of these other European Union countries where there are now no-go zones where the police absolutely will not go in to enforce the laws. And it's open season on the people of Europe by all these migrants coming on in. Of course they're going to want to protect themselves.
Well, it's the most fundamental human right there is. It's the right to defend yourself.
Absolutely.
The right to self-preservation.
Absolutely.
What is the problem with these leftists? Why can't they get this through their thick skulls?
Because their plans for a global government require that we not be able to defend ourselves.
Yeah, I know their agenda very well. I've been following your show for many years. Not your show, your website, I mean. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the job, the great job you're doing. To me, it looks like I attended another 4-year university listening to your show and reading your website. So you do you're the greatest guy on the web, really. I mean, I like Alex Jones as well, but he's a little off the wall sometimes. But your show is excellent. So congratulations. You have one of the best shows, Mike, and I commend you for that.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm going to hang up and let other people. I'm going to let other people,
Okay. Well, thank you for that because the phone lines are full right now. We're going to switch to John in Chicago. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, we have a new phrase to use now. It's left-wing lone wolf attacks. Who would have thought we'd be saying that, right? I mean, I heard about that little explosive device in the restaurant in South California. Did you hear that?
No, I didn't hear that one.
Your device, they they lit a fuse on a homemade incendiary device and threw it into like a coffee shop, and it landed under a table, and everybody scrambled and trampled each other, and then the thing blew off, and nobody got really hurt, but that's what it's incredible if we're going to end up with a police state because these left-wingers are dressed with the bandanas over their face, and they're attacking.
Oh, but listen. CNN says they're actually right-wingers, and CNN wouldn't lie to us about something that important, would they?
Right. No, I'm just glad that you made that transition from bad advice about Iran right into Ukraine, because I think I read yesterday that Putin said Poroshenko needs another infusion of cash from the EU and the United States, so he's going to start attacking eastern Ukraine again.
Yes, and that's what he's doing.
He starts it up again. But I don't like that Nikki Haley running into the UN and starts screaming Russian aggression. That's the exact same page that Obama was on, and I'm glad. And we've done this for the last 2 years on your show, pounded in the ground that it was a U.S. finance coup.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and I'm very, very concerned about what Trump is doing, and we are going to cover that in depth in the third hour. So, John, we're going to have to let you go. We're coming up here on another commercial break, and we're going to have enough time to start with Heather in Illinois. But Heather, I may have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Okay.
Okay, so you're going to wait through the commercial break, and then we'll start talking with you because we're about 5 seconds away from it. And we'll be right back with Heather in Illinois after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to go to Heather in Illinois. Heather, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Mike. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller. And I'm telling you what, I am so sick of the posts I see on Facebook from people just being just nasty about Mr. Trump. I don't understand. I mean, he's our president, and yet there's absolutely no respect at all given to him. And then people throwing the race card out. You know, oh, he's racist, oh, he's this, oh, he's that. We really don't know what Mr. Trump, who he really is, But
no, we don't. And let me point out two things. First of all, Donald Trump has been in the public eye for 30 years. And nobody called him racist or misogynist or any of these things until he went up against Hillary Clinton. And remember, the Clintons' earlier political career was dominated by what was called the politics of personal destruction. Just go on out and destroy the other person in the eyes of the public, and they're still doing it. Second, when you look at how many Twitter followers are fakes or Facebook friends are fakes and everything, when you realize that thugs are being paid to go on out and commit acts of violence, then you have to accept that a lot of those people who are on social media posting attacks on Donald Trump are also being paid to do that. And there are public relations companies where that's their entire business. They'll get a big chunk of money to have a bunch of people, phony IDs and everything, go on out on the social media pretending to be ordinary people pushing a particular agenda. It's called grassroots lobbying, and it is, sadly, perfectly legal in this country.
Yeah, well, some of my friends put stuff on, and it's just ridiculous, the bashing. But did you catch did you watch YouTube Live? Because they had a video the other day where Omarosa went on The View and just totally destroyed Joy Behar. And it was actually quite comical. She tried to sandbag her as she was talking, and Omarosa just shut her down. I just sat and chuckled because I thought, oh, my God, they were just, like, trying to throw everything under the bus, and Omarosa was like, I'm just not going to fall for your games. You either let me answer the question or not. And they on The View did not like that, and I thought it was hilarious because they just love to shut people down.
They absolutely do. I remember what Milo was saying about the protests on Wednesdays. Liberals have just gotten into this habit of not debating, not discussing, of just bullying people into silence, name-calling them. You're an anti-Semite, you're a fascist, you're a sexist, and whatever it is until the opposition shuts up. It's winning through intimidation and threats, and it shows that the underlying intellectual support for their argument and position simply does not exist. Now, I generally don't watch The View either live or on YouTube, but you're right, that would have been a funny video to see.
It is. It actually is, and I thought Omarosa did a fabulous job. But it's so negative and you know, when we had to tolerate 8 years of Obama, and we're not supposed to be like, thank God, this is I believe. I'm being openly optimistic about, you know, Trump.
Well, I'm starting to develop a little bit of caution. We have to let you go because it's station identification, and I got two more calls we're going to take, and then we're going to close the phone lines because I got a bunch of news I need to get to. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take 2 more phone calls, then we're going to close the phone lines because I got a lot of news to get to, and then, of course, we have the Lady Claire joining us in an hour, and she's got a lot of stuff to talk about as well. So we're going to go to Alex in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I'm afraid that the all-seeing eye is doing it to us again. We need to yank it down. It's the all-seeing eye still in control. And I'm kind of concerned that CIA or someone probably already talked to Trump and told him that, you know, this is the story. You can be with it or you can be history right now.
Maybe, maybe not. Maybe not. Okay, I'm like I said, I'm alarmed at Trump's statements, but there may be another explanation, but we're going to go into that in the third hour, okay?
Well, I wanted to tell you one other thing. I've seen Trump too many times. Like, I think that he knows that there were bombs in the building on 9/11. I think he knows that we really never went to the moon.
Wait a minute. All right, we're going to drop you at that point. That was the shark right there. Graham in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Michael. I wanted to get your point on a couple subjects. This whole Starbucks thing that was going kind of crazy this week with the protesters, and they destroyed that Starbucks. I mean, is that really? You think that's a legitimate thing, or was it staged? Because Starbucks is like the most politically liberal entity out there, you know, throwing all their support toward that whole beast.
Yeah, it did not make sense for them to be trashing the Starbucks, but then if they're just paid there to cause violence, they're not going to be choosing their targets based on the underlying politics there. Although you know, Starbucks is very liberal, but now they're dealing with a boycott because of their promise to hire 10,000 refugees. Now Starbucks has reversed that, or they haven't reversed it. They said in addition they're going to hire 10,000 veterans to try and offset that. But I think it really is ridiculous to allow politics to infect so much of our daily lives. And we can't ignore politics because politics is not going to ignore us. But at some point we need to pull back and say, let's let the children have their tantrum on the ground, and we've got better things to do than let ourselves get sucked up into it.
Yeah, well, absolutely, because it didn't make any sense to see that destruction. And I'm like, that's who you're support, you know. Anyway, but hey, so on the second note, on the coming, you know, economic crash, what do you think happens to the common everyday person who's just, you know, working their job and, you know, taking time with their family, and they've got a mortgage and a car payment or whatever, and maybe they're getting out of debt, but if something happens and President Trump makes, you know, take some action to, you know, start over, push the reset or whatever, what happens to the everyday person? Do they go to debtor's prison, or do they get forgiven their debt like everything else, or what do you think?
Well, obviously the holders of the debt do not want to forgive the debt. We've seen how hard Christine Lagarde was trying to prevent Greece from invoking odious debt because half of their debt was created by fraud with Papandreou and Goldman Sachs. But it may take something as draconian as a new jubilee when people finally understand that under that model of private central banking, it is impossible to ever pay the debt off. A dramatic change is required there. And if we don't make that change, then there's going to be a global crash. We could see the beginning of a whole new dark ages.
Right. Well, I know. I mean, being forgiven debt would be a great thing for, you know, a nation or for the world. But what happens to that family that's working so hard and doing the right things, and, you know, they've got their mortgage because, you know, that's the way you get a home anymore. And does someone go to a debtor's prison, or does it get canceled and you got a home there? You know, or I just don't understand on a personal level what that means.
Well, again, we don't know how they're going to try and reconcile the situation. If they start inflating the money to try and stay ahead of the debt, then all of a sudden those mortgages are going to be actually easy to pay off. But depending upon, if you have a fixed rate mortgage, you're going to be able to pay the mortgage off very, very quickly. If it's variable rate, you're going to be in trouble. But in the end, the bankers will always arrange for the poor people to pay for the bankers' crimes and mistakes. And everybody, needs to be trying to get out of debt. We've been saying that for years. Try and get out of debt. Pay off your credit cards. Get out of debt any way that you can. That is your greatest security. But even then, we could see government simply saying we have to confiscate the wealth of the people to pay the bankers. We saw that with Roosevelt when they outlawed private ownership of gold and silver, and they're starting to talk about that. I'm sorry, Roosevelt banned gold, not silver, but they're already talking about banning private ownership of investment gold and silver.
Right. Okay. Well, cool. It's just a scary thing to start thinking about,
Yeah, well,
I appreciate your thoughts on the topic.
You do need to be thinking about it. You should have been thinking about it 2 years ago, but better late than never.
Well, yeah. Well, no, and I have been, but it's hard to pay a 30-year mortgage off in 2 years. That kind of debt. It's not going to happen.
I do understand that. Trump could pull something like Nixon did with the wage and price freeze, and simply say everything is absolutely locked where it is. You stay in the home where you are right now until we can sort out this mess and get everything restarted. That would probably be the best situation. Everybody just stay where you are. No evictions, no foreclosures until we can sort this mess out.
Right. Okay. Cool.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to go ahead and close the phone lines because I got a lot of stuff to get through. So does Claire here. And we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Now then, interestingly enough, Donald Trump has come on out and said that Israel's continuing of stealing Palestinian land for these settlements is not helpful to peace. And saying that if we want to bring peace, we have to sort of tone down the aggression and so that everybody can go back to the peace table. Now, of course, Israel came on back and said that Israel's settlement expansion isn't the problem; it's the Palestinians' fault, and that the government of Israel was elected to act on the Jewish people's right to build in all parts of our land, forgetting that small, tiny detail that Palestine is not Israel's land anywhere than other in the Bible and in the imaginations of Israel's government. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister is trying to run through a law in the Knesset that would retroactively legalize the settlements that were built on Palestinian land without official Israeli permission. Now, in the eyes of international law, all those settlements are illegal. But in the eyes of Israel's government, the ones that they gave permission to are legal. The ones that were just built are illegal, and Israel's government has been actually evicting those people and returning the land to the Palestinians. But now Netanyahu wants the Knesset to pass a law that says anywhere the Israelis have built on all the land in the West Bank, that's now legal and nothing can be done about it. And it should be a reminder that just because something is the law of the land doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Everything that Stalin did in the Soviet Union was the letter of the law of the land. We know that that did not make it right. Same thing with the Nazis. Same thing with a lot of the things going on in the United States of America. Just because it's the law does not mean it is right. Now, Netanyahu himself may be trying to kick up a controversy as a distraction because apparently the investigations into his corruption are closing in on him and more are beginning to surface. And so the word we're hearing throughout Israel sources is that Netanyahu may actually be brought down, and a lot of people in Israel's government would like to see somebody a little more moderate in his place in order to try and tone things down before it really does get out of control. Now, a group of U.S. citizens and Palestinian nationals have launched a lawsuit against Prime Minister Netanyahu and some members of Donald Trump's administration for perpetuating and enabling war crimes. And this basically has to do with some of Trump's advisors who have been part of these organizations that send donations to Israeli government leaders and to these illegal settlements. And based on the Anti-Terrorism Act and the Alien Tort Statute, the complaint alleges that the Israeli officials used the money to fund settlements and violent extremism in the occupied West Bank, which is identified as international terrorism. Now, the other day we were telling you about this lawsuit that was citing the international law that governs occupied territories. And this law says that Israel has the right to confiscate Palestinian land for military security purposes, but that once that security military need is over, the land must be returned. What Israel has been doing is grabbing land, saying we need a military base or a security buffer, and then they turn around and say, well, we don't need it anymore, we're going to sell it to these developers to build a settlement on. And that's where the violation comes in. So that lawsuit is also making its way up to the international court. Now, turning to the economic news, the U.S. dollar had a very bad drop last month. In fact, they're saying it was the worst in 30 years. And a lot of it may be nudges over this talk of Iran getting out of the dollar, joining all these other nations that don't want to be involved with the dollar anymore. Because if you're using the dollar, you are there controllable by U.S. sanctions. If you're not using the U.S. dollars, then the U.S. sanctions can't touch you. The U.S. sanctions say you can't buy things from the United States of America. The United States doesn't really have that much to sell. Our manufacturing is in decline. Governments are now realizing U.S. military exports are overpriced bits of bloated junk. They're turning to Germany and Russia and China. And nobody wants our GMO agriculture. Now, according to Doug Noland, quantitative easing has not stopped. The central banks are all in just creating all kinds of new money and giving it to the financial district to make it look like the economy is still working. But it isn't. For the economy to work, it has to work everywhere for everyone, and all you need to do is walk down the main street of your town or city and take a look around with fresh eyes, and you'll see this economy is not working at all. It's an illusion of a functioning economy, and it's being propped up by printing presses, ink and paper and numbers in a computer. Over in Italy, their youth unemployment has hit over 40%. Now, here in the United States, they're proclaiming January was a great month. There was a lot of hiring. Our unemployment, or rather our jobless rate is down to just 4%. And I understand why maybe Donald Trump doesn't want to admit that that number is a fake, because if he comes on out and says, look, the real unemployment is 30%, the corporate media is going to turn around and say, we had a 5% unemployment rate, and under the first month of Donald Trump, it jumps to 30%. Look what a terrible job he's doing. Harry Truman was right. It's the hottest kitchen in the world here. Now, a lot of people, and I am one of them, are thinking that we got Donald Trump too late. The U.S. economy cannot be repaired. There's an article about that in Zero Hedge, saying the damage is irreversible. And, of course, my basis for saying it's past the point of repair is that 11th marble. And the growing realization around the world that the model of private central banking is designed to create permanent unpayable debt with which to control countries and people, rule by compound interest. Now, Sony Pictures has lost $913 million this last year. They had a string of disasters. Passengers, Inferno, Arrival, Long Halftime Walk. Nobody's going to see them. A lot of them are just chock full of liberal propaganda, and people are turning off from that. They don't want to see any. They don't want to spend money, go to a theater or do a pay-per-view or buy a DVD to get propagandized more than they already are off the TV news networks. Hollywood needs to remember the 1930s Depression. And it was almost the golden age of Hollywood, because Hollywood was putting out movies that were escapist fantasies that would allow people to temporarily get away from all that chaos and confusion, not just jam them further in. Now, Apple's been having a whole line of problems. People are not rushing to buy the iPhone 7. They're hanging on to their iPhone 5s and iPhone 6s. The iWatch has never been the huge success they wanted to. It sold well for the first couple of months, and then immediately it fell off. And now Apple has missed the deadline for their 13 billion, with a B, euro tax payment owed to Ireland. Ireland found that Apple received illegal tax benefits and hit them with that huge, huge fine. And Apple has missed the deadline. They've paid part of the money. They can't pay all of it. Now, here is an article over in Government Slaves. State minimum wage hikes already passed into law, expected to cost 2.6 million jobs, new study finds. I would question that on the basis that most companies are already operating at the minimum number of employees they need. The vast majority of companies are not engaged in feather bedding, hiring employees they don't really need. They can't let these people go. What they're going to do is pay them the minimum wage, and then they're going to pass that cost on to the customers. But this idea that you can have the working population of America working for pennies and then expect them to turn around and support this huge consumer economy is ridiculous. Prior to 2008, 60% of the economic activity in the United States was consumer spending. And they yanked the rug out from under it. It's collapsed, and they're all standing around scratching their heads, unable to figure out why. So, now yesterday we were talking about how there was a new attempt to try and block the Brexit by saying that the leaving of the single currency market, the EEA agreement, required its own referendum. And the High Court said this is nonsense, to the Brexit people's delight, Nigel Farage. Basically because Great Britain is party to the EEA agreement only because it's an EU member state. Once the Great Britain leaves the EU, the EEA agreement automatically ceases to apply to Great Britain. And on that basis, they threw that whole lawsuit out. Now, the EU is already out there trying to be very patronizing. I mean, and basically this EEA lawsuit was trying to set the stage saying Great Britain can go back to calling itself a sovereign country, but they're still going to be required to use the euro, or to bring it in and convert to the euro. And that was declared nonsense. But the European Union is out there saying that Britain will always be a junior partner after the Brexit. And of course, Theresa May is saying, no, we're going to be a sovereign, independent nation on our own. We're not going to be your partner in any way, shape, or form. If you want to do trade with us, go ahead and open trade negotiations. Stop patronizing us. Now, Donald Tusk, who's already under severe criticism for his comments about Donald Trump, has just done something very alarming. He has basically gone on out to the leaders of the 27 member states and demanding the leaders make a pledge, swear an oath to serve Brussels, which is telegraphing just how fragile the EU is. And they're trying to find some way to glue it back in, forgetting that that European Central Bank and the migrant crisis is what's tearing it apart. And both are supported by the European Central Committee and, obviously, George Soros. So it's like trying to save the Titanic with a roll of duct tape. It is really not going to work. Nigel Farage is out there saying that the EU is showing its true nature now. It's genuinely anti-American now. And there does seem to be growing hostility ever since Donald Trump got elected, because he's not part of that globalist New World Order. So we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, remember what I said earlier in the show, that America, the United States, appears to be in decline, like the fall of ancient Rome. I'm not the only one saying it. Very interesting story where the European Union leaders are now saying that as the United States collapses, the EU will become the world's superpower, which is rather arrogant when you consider how close to collapse the EU itself is. But that serene world where the United States is recognized as the greatest nation on earth and the reigning superpower and keeper of the peace and supporter of justice and human rights, that image is now gone. It is gone. Angela Merkel, who now is finally realizing that her open borders policy is probably going to end her political career, has done another U-turn. Germany is now paying migrants up to £1,000 equivalent to go back home. And I think it's too little too late. The damage is done, both to Merkel and to Germany. Here in the United States of America, the U.S. government has now lost track of 9,500 migrants with known links to terrorism. Gosh, don't you like those open borders? Don't you just love it? 9,500 migrants with known links to terrorism are somewhere inside the United States of America right now, and the U.S. government has no idea where they are. Mexico is expressing their ire with the United States by announcing a boycott of American goods, and they're going to be targeting McDonald's, Starbucks, Coca-Cola, and Walmart. Now then, former CIA Director General Petraeus is out there, and you know, it's kind of interesting. You'll watch somebody who goes and does their job for the government, like Colin Powell, and they do what they're told. They'll tell the lies they're told to tell, and then after they're out of the office, they'll open up and say, yeah, it was a lie and it wasn't working. Well, former CIA Director General Petraeus is now saying that the New World Order is collapsing, and it could collapse totally. Now, from his point of view, that's a bad thing. But he's acknowledging that, yeah, this whole plan for a single golden throne of planet Earth is in serious, serious trouble. Let's see how we're doing. Send a message to the control room here. Here's a little bit of good news. The Montana House has passed a bill that will authorize firearms on post office property in defiance of federal restrictions. Now, it's a gray area because, you know, a while back we had that problem with postal workers just going on these shooting rampages. It was called going postal. But the regulation was you can't have a gun in the post office. And the post office came back and said that any postal worker caught on the premises with a gun will be fired on the spot, which may not have provoked the reaction that they wanted. But we're seeing this all over the country. There's a pushback in defense of the Second Amendment. And so we can expect a staged mass shooting by the gun grabbers any moment now. Because it always seems that every time states start to respect the Second Amendment and give us back our right to keep and bear arms to defend our homes with, there'll be a newsworthy event. Oh, guns are terrible. Whoa. And do you remember the irony that we're seeing with all this, where they're out there saying we shouldn't judge all Muslims based on the actions of a crazed few, which is true. Shouldn't gun owners get the same deal? We shouldn't castigate all law-abiding gun enthusiasts for the actions of a few individuals whose brains are melted on prescription antidepressants? That's another one of those inconsistencies in the liberal agenda, isn't it? Meanwhile, over in the Bronx, a New York... Actually, we're going to save this until after we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over in the Bronx, a sergeant with the New York Police Department has been convicted for raping the 13-year-old daughter of his former girlfriend. And I think we're entering an age where we have lost our innocence as a society, where we assume that a person in a uniform is somehow better. We assume a person in a three-piece suit is somehow better. We assume a person in a white laboratory coat is really concerned with our health. We assume government agencies are actually doing their jobs. We assume those correspondents and prostitutes on the corporate media are actually telling us the truth about anything. If we wanted a label for the current moment in history, we could call it the age of disillusionment, which is not a bad thing if those beliefs are being used against you, to control you, to exploit you, to extract your money and your obedience. Now, out in San Bernardino, there was this ugly incident, was caught on video, where a deputy was telling this person who was there filing a complaint over a custody issue. And the deputy was just saying, I'm getting tired of you, and you're going to go to jail right now. And so the guy making the complaint says, why am I going to go to jail for? And the deputy says, I'll create something. Understand? You'll go to jail. You understand that. And they're out there pushing this Blue Lives Matter because we're supposed to assume that a police officer is correct no matter what. The reason there's a problem with opposition to the police is the police themselves. The unjustified beatings, the murders of innocent people, the plundering of our wealth through civil forfeiture. Now, there are a lot of good police officers out there. I know quite a few here on this island. And yes, it is unfair that they are being tarnished by the actions of these others. I have to do something. Anyway, I'm sorry for the pause here. I'm communicating with our control room. There we go. Here's an interesting story. In October of 2015, it's a little old, but it's relevant today. Law School Transparency published an investigation into admission standards at dozens of law schools. And what they found was that law schools have been lowering their admissions requirements simply to get more kids in there, paying tuition, to make more money. And because these students didn't really have the qualifications to be going to law school, they have a very high risk of failing that bar exam, which means they'll never get those jobs as lawyers with which to pay back those student loans. Virtually every aspect of our society has been turned into a racket, and that includes education. Because education isn't about education anymore, it's about indoctrination and plunging those college kids onto the debt hook as early and as hard as they possibly can and never, ever, ever letting them off. We live in a very predatory society where government and corporations are aligned together against the general population, and that is fascism. Now, here's a very alarming story, and I know Claire's going to be talking about one aspect of this. Radiation levels at Fukushima are spiking. They're at record high levels. And even worse, according to this article coming out of Your News Wire, scientists at Fukushima have declared a state of emergency because one of the ruined reactors is on the verge of actually falling into the ocean. Apparently the ground underneath has been so compromised by the melted cores of the reactors, they're concerned that one of them might topple over and portions of it actually go into the ocean. That would be ugly. Ugly, ugly situation here. So let's talk about human-caused global warming. Believe it or not, Russian icebreakers are stuck in the unexpectedly and unusually thick sea ice up there in the Arctic. Remember when Al Gore told us the Arctic would be ice-free in the summer of 2014? Wrong. And NOAA can come on out with all their satellites and say, oh, it's very thin, it looks like there's a lot of ice, but it's really, really thin and spread out. No, the people who are actually up there And you need to know, those Russian icebreakers are very, very capable ships. Russia has the only nuclear-powered icebreaker in the world. And they know how to build them because they have so much of that ice on their northern border. Just like they've built those wonderful fire suppression aircraft that everybody needs to borrow every time there's a wildfire. Now remember, I think it was about 15 years ago, the head of Greenpeace on an interview said that in 20 years' time, Greenland would lose all of its ice. And he got challenged on that, and eventually was forced to admit that, well, no, it's not really going to happen, but we need to dramatize global warming to get people to go along with the agenda. In other words, in less polite language, we're lying you out of your money in obedience. The reality is that Greenland is gaining ice. The carbon Nazis like to go down to the edge of Greenland and show you ice falling off into the ocean. Oh, it's losing the ice, losing the ice. What they're not showing you is all the snow falling all across the interior of Greenland and turning into ice under glaciation. You can't just say it's losing this much ice at the edge, therefore it's going to be ice-free in 20 years. You have to also look at how much new snow and ice accumulation is happening at the same time. They tend not to do that. Right now it is -5 degrees centigrade, and it's snowing in the United Arab Emirates. Very, very interesting here. Now, getting on to the issue of vaccinations, and this is really ramping up ever since Trump created this Vaccine Safety Commission and asked Robert Kennedy to look at it. Over in Great Britain, there's been this ugly, ugly incident where a local health authority has been given permission by the British courts to forcibly vaccinate a 7-month-old baby boy against the mother's wishes. And the mother's objection was because all of her older children had bad reactions to vaccinations in the past. And the courts ruled, well, too bad they had bad reactions. If we don't vaccinate this kid, Great Britain will vanish from the face of the earth, or some other such nonsense. And again, government and corporate interests aligned against the general population, that is fascism. Now, Facebook, along with all of its other problems, both here in Hawaii and the rest of the world, they have been hit with a $1.5 billion jury verdict against them regarding a company they acquired, VR, Oculus, virtual reality company Oculus. And ZeniMax Media sued Oculus in 2014 over the company stealing intellectual property, including copyrighted computer code, trade secrets, and technical know-how. And Oculus then used this stolen, pirated information to create Oculus Rift and get that $2 billion acquisition by Facebook, and I'm sure Facebook is now wishing they hadn't signed that check. Now, the Russian Interior Ministry has announced that they have so far fended off a massive wave of cyber attacks over the past 18 months that, had they succeeded, would have caused about $50 million in damage. And the Russian banks were being targeted, and credit financial institutions, and they've tracked it back to 2 specific crime rings, and they're going to try and see if they can get international warrants on them. Gee, the Russians are doing much better at this finding of cybercrime than the National Security Agency, aren't they? Of course, one of the top computer security companies in the world is Kaspersky Labs. Kaspersky thinks the Equation Group hackers are actually part of the NSA. Now, back during Trump's inauguration, there was a bit of a stink because just a few days before the inauguration, somebody infected the computer systems running the Washington, D.C. surveillance cameras with ransomware. And they shut down most of them, which meant had there been any kind of a mass rioting in the street, the D.C. police would not have been able to see where the problems were happening. And Washington, D.C.'s police department did not pay the ransomware. They simply reformatted the drives and rebooted the system. Apparently the computer at the center of it is not that complicated, and they had backups good for them. And it's now been deduced that the ransomware authors were planning to do it on the inauguration itself, figuring that in the panic of the moment and not having time to reset the system, the Washington, D.C. Police would pay the ransom to keep those cameras running, to look at all the problems that were going on in the streets from the crybabies. And apparently, Washington, D.C. police have succeeded in arresting the hackers involved behind this. That's a good thing. Now, over in Ohio, the Licking County government offices, and yes, that really is their name, including the police force, have been shut down completely by ransomware. And apparently somebody in the office fell for a phishing scam or downloaded something, and now the servers for the entire county government are locked up. And again, where is the National Security Agency? Aren't they able to protect our infrastructure? And if they aren't, why are we continuing to spend money on them? Now, we've all heard the phrase digital rights management, or DRM, and it doesn't seem to be impeding the content pirates one tiny bit, but it does make life very, very difficult for us law-abiding citizens here. And sometimes it's just a nuisance, because Prime Minister Gordon Brown was given a gift of 25 DVDs of classic American movies by U.S. President Barack Obama. And when Gordon Brown sat down to watch them, he couldn't, because Obama had given him DVDs from the United States, which is called Region 1, and they will not play in Prime Minister Gordon Brown's DVD in Great Britain, which is Region 2. Now, the reason they came up with this region idea was to maximize profitability, because when you buy one of these discs, you are not paying for the cost of manufacturing the disc plus a profit. You are paying what they think you're willing to pay to get it. And what you're able and willing to pay for it varies around the world. So here in the United States, they're going to sell a DVD for perhaps $20. But down in Mexico, where nobody could pay $20 for a DVD, they'll sell that same DVD for $5. And the reason they have the region codes is to prevent people from driving down into Mexico, buying up a huge bunch of the $5 DVDs, and then coming back to the United States, going to the flea market and selling them for $10. From a business point of view, it does seem to make a little bit of sense. But at the meantime, the degree of inconvenience, not to mention embarrassment, really does not come across very well to the American people. I remember, I used to tell you the story about when I built this computer, and I had a Blu-ray player in there, and I thought, oh good, I can watch my Blu-rays because I've got twin high-def monitors. And it wouldn't play because the monitors didn't have this special chip in there to assure the Blu-ray player that it wasn't a recording device. And so I just give up. I did have to replace the monitors a while back, and discovered quite unintentionally that the new monitors had that chip. Not that I have a lot of time to watch Blu-rays anymore. But it does make it more trouble than it's really worth. It really does. 3D is starting to kind of fade away now. Two of the big companies have stopped making 3D sets. I think 4K is going to go the same way. Certainly for people like Claire and I at our age with our eyes, sitting across from the TV on the futon and the chair, we can't tell the difference. You can tell the difference if you go and put your nose right up against the screen, but who actually watches a movie that way? And 4K is a bandwidth hog, and there's not much 4K content. That was also a big problem with 3D. For a while, Time Warner Cable actually had a 3D pay-per-view channel. They had nothing on it. And we weren't going to buy a pay-per-view 3D movie just to watch something in 3D. In fact, to be very honest, I think I can count the number of times we've actually used the 3D feature on the fingers of one hand. And two of them were Avatar, which I think is the only movie that really used 3D well and didn't fall for this temptation of just jamming things at the camera to say, hey, we've got 3D for you. Cameron had the prudence to be to have a very light touch on that. And that's one of the reasons why he's my favorite director here. Now, Japan was experimenting with a space junk collector because space junk is becoming a major, major problem. I've even got my idea of how to deal with it. And they set up a test unit where they literally were going to have this electrodynamic tether that was going to slow the junk down into a lower orbit where it would burn up completely before it hits the ground. Of course, they were saying the same thing about Skylab, and that came down in a couple of large chunks. But apparently, they launched this on a cargo ship carrying supplies to the International Space Station, and they're not sure if it's actually successfully deployed. Apparently, it doesn't have a camera, just sensors on the reel. So they're not actually sure if it's there or working. But they do need to be careful about very long wires in space, because at orbital velocities passing through the Earth's magnetic field, it's a dynamo. And there have actually been cases of experimental long-length tethers building up enough voltage along the line to actually cause damage. And that was kind of a little bit unexpected. Now, the other day we were talking about GMO apples. They're going to be hitting the stores very, very soon, and everybody was concerned over the fact that they're not going to be labeled. But as it turns out, fortunately, there is a way to identify them. Believe it or not, this GMO label has been developed to allow them to be pre-sliced. So you will buy them already cut into slices. The thinking of the company behind this is people don't want to get too involved in cutting up their own apple. We will cut it for them. There's the value added. And so in the GMO, well, when we come back to the commercials, I'll tell you what they did and why it's going to backfire. And welcome back to the show. So we're talking about this company, Okanagan Specialty Fruits, that has been allowed to start selling a GMO apple with virtually no testing whatsoever. And the entire rationale behind this is they're going to pre-slice the apples. The thinking of this company is that in this convenience-driven world, we don't want to be bothered cutting up our own apples. They're going to be pre-sliced and packaged, which obviously is going to be easy to identify. Now, when you cut an apple and it starts to turn brown, the chemical in there that turns brown is what the GMO designers of this apple have taken out. There's a bit of a problem, though. That's the exact same chemical, polyphenol oxidase, from which you get most of the health benefits of eating an apple in the first place. Remember, an apple a day keeps your doctor away. And so in order to make this pre-sliced, convenient apple, they have taken out basically what people eat apples for. So, and again, I'm rather insulted at this idea that I can't cut up an apple. I don't think it's going to be very successful, but they're already out there saying they're going to be planting thousands and thousands of trees. This is going to be a big hit. I don't think so. I'm going to take a little side trip here. This story just came on over. Apparently, the White House Correspondents' Dinner may be canceled. This is another escalation of the corporate media versus the Trump White House, where a lot of the people who normally would show up at the White House Correspondents' Dinner are now saying we're going fishing that weekend. And it's already known that the comedian that they have as entertainment, Samantha Bee, is basically going to be hostile to Trump. So why should he want to show up anyway? So it really is kind of an awkward situation. You've got a whole bunch of media people who hate the president and don't even want him to be there anyway. And at this point they're saying, yeah, the Correspondents' Dinner is still going to go ahead, but it may be ladies in chairs. Maybe the independent media should be invited to this. We're all correspondents, if you think about it. That's a good thing. Now, getting back to the science, we have seen a lot of this talk about insect drones that can be used for spying or covert attacks. And, of course, trying to make a mechanical drone that small has proved to be very, very troublesome. There have been experiments on taking real live insects and somehow wiring their brains with computers to direct where they're going to go. They tend not to work very well. And there is now a hybrid system out that's being developed called the Dragonfly. And it starts with a genetically engineered dragonfly whose neurons are sensitive to light. And so instead of having to have electric stimulus of the neurons, they can do it with ultra-thin fiber optics and a solid-state laser. And they're able to have a much more continuous control than the on and off of an electric current. So that's real science fiction stuff, but apparently it's really working. We're going to take a break for station identification. We're going to be back with the lovely Lady Claire after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And as you can see in the BAM user video camera, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who was dashing into the room here. And
at breakneck speed,
at
I may
breakneck
add.
speed here, and so there we are. Before we go to her, though, story I feel we need to cover before we go any further. This is coming out of Battle Creek Inquirer, and apparently the organized groups to protest Donald Trump are already assembling in Houston to try and cause disruptions and a ruckus down there, which is kind of amazing because, to the best of my knowledge, Donald Trump himself isn't actually going to the Super Bowl. I have not heard that. If I'm wrong, please feel free to let me know otherwise. But I don't think he's actually going to be there. But like I said, it's a symbolic target of value, and everybody's getting on in there, and I'm sure the police are not going to be happy about what's going on. So what is your first story you want to talk about?
Well, dear, we know that you talk frequently about alleged human-caused global warming.
Yes.
And a UN official made an astonishing admission in a meeting in Brussels that global warming is really about destroying capitalism. Now, this was made by UN official Cristina Figueres at a news conference in Brussels. Figueres admitted that the global warming conspiracy set by the UN's Framework Convention on Climate Change, of which she is the executive secretary, has a goal not of environmental activists to save the world from ecological calamity, but to destroy capitalism. She said very casually, this is the first time in the history of humankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution.
And what are they planning on replacing it with? Did they actually say?
They didn't actually get it out there, but my guess would be feudalism.
Probably.
You know, if any of you ladies have gone to maybe the more bargain stores where I like to try to shop, I think that you will see kind of an interesting trend. And it's what I would call the surf wardrobe trend. And I'm not talking about surf, S-U-R-F, as in surf's up. I'm talking about S-E-R-F.
Yes.
Yeah, major corporations.
Poverty chic.
Yeah, poverty chic. Now, this is right from the horse's mouth, so enough said.
Well, yes, we know global warming is a fraud, and we know it's driven by politics. And certainly from Al Gore's point of view, he has no intention of allowing it to harm his capitalism because he's done very well out of the scam.
Oh, you take a look at the mansion the guy's got. Minor carbon footprint, my astrolabe.
and of course, you got that new place out on the beach in California.
Yeah.
So much for rising ocean levels.
Yeah.
What else do you have?
Well, I have been watching the last couple of weeks, and I've identified some things that have made me go, And I hope that I am very wrong, but I'm seeing that I'm having to wonder so much if this election was as much a victory for Donald Trump as it's been for the deep state. And I'd like to go into some observations I have about that.
Okay, and then I have an observation I need to make.
Okay. The U.S. betrays Iran deal as predicted and edges closer to war. This comes from Global Research, which is a pretty sane and sober blog, and one that I like to link to from time to time. And it goes on to say, as the world remains mesmerized by Donald Trump, his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, has brazenly linked Iran to Yemeni fighters who attacked a Saudi ship, as well as cited an Iranian missile test as grounds to reverse the course on U.S. rapprochement with Tehran, concluding that Iran was put on notice. Now, several years back, the Brookings Institution came out with a 2009 policy paper titled, Which Path to Persia? Options for a New American Strategy Toward Iran, .pdf. And it laid out the various means of provoking war and regime change against Iran. In it, Brookings explicitly revealed how a superb offer would be given to Iran only to be intentionally revoked in a manner portraying Iran as, quote-unquote, ungrateful.
We actually saw that this last year, where Iran complied with all the the requirements of the P5+1. The United States did not, and then the United States justified it by saying, "Well, yes, Iran is complying, but they're still being defiant. They didn't comply quickly enough." And that seems to be exactly what the Brookings Institute was proposing.
That's exactly what they were saying back then. And I've got a memo to National Security Advisor Flynn. If the U.S. goes forward with this war against Iran, what exactly do you intend to do about Russia, which will almost inevitably rush to Iran's aid? Military and public political officials have all said the same thing. You attack Tehran, you attack Moscow.
Beijing has said the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would very much like for this guy, before he starts flying off the handle, that he has some very serious long talks with SecDef Mathis about just what the U.S. capabilities against Russia and or China are. I think Mathis' response is going to be to counsel patience while the many problems with American military posture are resolved. And here is another article on the same area.
Well, before you do that, we need to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So please proceed. What are we talking about
All
here?
right. There is another article, again from Global Research, this written by one of my favorite peace activist progressives, Stephen Lendman. And he makes the observation that it's just 2 weeks since President Donald Trump was sworn into office after proclaiming his policy of America first and vowing to defend the United States against the ravages of other countries. Now, unfortunately, he feels that any illusion that this policy spelled a turn away from the unending wars waged by the U.S. over the past quarter of a century in favor of isolationism have rapidly been dispelled. Trump and his advisors have been very bellicose in one sharp provocation after another in the long-standing militarist policy of American imperialism. And I just have something I'd like to say to Donald Trump or anyone who has his ear who's listening to this. Again, if he gets goaded into this by his bromantic buddy, Israel's Netanyahu, that it's the right thing to do, he's going to be leading this country right off a cliff. And it is completely conceivable that a war against Iran will ultimately lead to a war with Russia. Now, I want everyone listening and watching to understand, I have the greatest respect for our men and women in uniform. But our military has been badly shortchanged by short-sighted governmental policies over decades, which has left them without the troop strength, the money, the manufacturing, or the weaponry to achieve a successful outcome of a conventional war with Russia. The Russians spend a lot less for their equipment than does the U.S. military, but are getting a lot more bang for their weaponry buck than does the U.S. military. And Mike, part of the reason for this is the culture of U.S. weapons manufacturers makes their CEOs believe that it's perfectly fine to deliver weapons late to the point where they're obsolete, not functioning anywhere near to spec like the F-35, and the government has to shell out an obscene amount of cost overruns for obsolete, non-functional equipment because that's the way it's always been done.
And everybody makes money along the line. I love the fact that we actually have Ohio-class SSBN submarines out there carrying Trident missiles that, when launched, could actually go the wrong way.
Ow.
And that is very, very alarming, along with all the other recently revealed problems with U.S. weapons. Are we kind of at the end of this topic? Because I have a comment.
Yes, we are.
Okay, now, I am very, very, very troubled by this rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration. He's kept so many of his campaign promises, and obviously the one that I was hoping he was going to keep was to go back to being friends with Russia and China, peace through trade, and the indications are absolutely not at this point. So if Donald Trump is in fact going to continue the United States on the same military and economic path it's been on, then he could easily wind up being the last president of the United States of America ever, because the country will not survive 4 years on this path. Now, there are a couple of other things to keep in mind. The first is that Donald Trump is still trying to woo the Congress over the confirmations of his nominees for his various cabinet positions and other administrative posts. And when you hear these people going in before the congressional committees and then eventually for the Senate, it is clear that they are telling these members of Congress what they think the members of Congress want to hear. And many members of Congress are still fully on board with this war agenda, like Senator John McCain and Lindsey Graham. And we have to take into account the possibility that Trump's strategy is to convince the Congress he's going along with this agenda long enough to get his administration locked into place. So how Donald Trump behaves after he gets all of the confirmations is going to be a much stronger indicator of which way this is going to go.
Yeah.
The other thing to keep in mind is the way Donald Trump does business. And the insight there goes back to his book, The Art of the Deal, where he says basically when you're starting a negotiation, you go way overboard, way past what it is you actually want, and then you let the other side negotiate you back to what you wanted in the first place, what was acceptable to you. And this is obviously something that has worked very well for Donald Trump over the years, and as president, he's going to stick with what he knows will work for him. Now, politicians never like to back up. They think it's losing face if they're seen to back up from a negotiating point even one little tiny bit. Donald Trump doesn't care. So one other possibility that we need to hold out is that Donald Trump's very aggressive rhetoric toward Russia and China and Iran is his overreaching first demand, his opening bid.
His opening gambit.
His opening gambit, and then Russia, China, and Iran will negotiate back to what Donald Trump wanted for real in the first place. So we have to be very careful here and not jump to a conclusion. Again, because Donald Trump is an outsider, he's not going to behave like a career politician. He is a very bright man. He's got his own ideas. And certainly a lot of what he's saying is being embellished and spun by the corporate media. But I think it's going to be very hard to see what's going on until after at least the first 100 days. We have to give him those 100 days. If, in fact, he's pursuing this war agenda, then I'm still very disappointed in him, and I think it means the ultimate end of the United States of America. But, again, Donald Trump at his worst is still going to be a heck of a lot better than Hillary at her best, because if Hillary had succeeded in stealing the election, the bombs would be falling right now.
I agree. Speaking of which, I'd like to bop on over to the war in Yemen. And the Pentagon is affirming that the Houthi attack on Saudi ship was intended for a U.S. seacraft. And there was a recent maritime suicide bombing off the coast of Yemen, which may have been a dress rehearsal, I'm not kidding you, for a comparable attack on a U.S. destroyer patrolling waterways in the Middle East.
Well, what they're trying to do is recover from Spicer's goof in the White House press room, where he accused Iran of attacking a U.S. ship. And the correspondent from CBS had to lean over and say that was a Saudi ship. And Spicer said, yeah, you're right. And so now they're coming back with this thing, but okay, the Yemenites didn't attack a U.S. ship. It was a Saudi ship, but they're going to attack a U.S. ship. And again, you need to realize Saudi Arabia has been making war on Yemen for a very long time. The Houthis have every right to defend their country against aggression. This idea that Yemen or Iran do not have a right to defend themselves when other nations stick their nose into the business of these countries is an absolutely ridiculous argument. But that's what the corporate media is trying to sell you right now.
I think there's another angle on this, too. And I have to wonder, because these reports were never sourced. These analysts were never sourced.
Oh, they never are.
So I have to wonder, is this fake news in order to groom the American people to accept a larger role in the horrific U.S.-enabled Saudi war on Yemen, should there be an incident where an American military ship is hit with a false flag and Houthi rebels are blamed? And the Saudis are committing war crimes of unimaginable proportions here. They're killing kids, they're killing women, they're killing the medically fragile elderly. And the kids are starving in Yemen because the food cannot get through.
Let me pull you down. All right. How are you doing? All right, we're going to let Claire cough and choke there for a little while. But it is a major problem with this attempt to portray countries who are defending themselves from outside aggression or covert coup d'etat, to portray them as somehow in the wrong for not just opening their doors and allowing the United States to just walk on in, change governments, and start opening McDonald's and Walmarts all over the place.
Yeah, and I have to wonder, because there seems to be such vitriol against Iran right now. The U.S. is claiming that Iran is supporting the Houthi rebels, that this might also be a backdoor to an invasion of Iran. And guess what the U.S. Navy just did? They just sent out the USS Cole in that area to patrol the waters.
We remember that one.
Oh, yeah.
That's already got a rather bad dent in its hull from that last false flag. And but again, we have the United States screaming that it's wrong for Iran to be supporting the Houthis against the U.S.-backed Saudi invasion. And, of course, now we have the U.S. is now exposed for having been supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. And we're almost at the point right now where people are going to give up saying what's right and what's wrong and just start dealing with the fact that, you've got Saudi Arabia attacking Yemen. Yemen's got its supporters and friends. Saudi Arabia has its supporters and friends. It's an equal sum game here. And this attempt to convince us that it's okay for the United States to do these things, but not okay for other countries to defend themselves against us, is utterly absurd. And trying to sell that, I think, is a major reason why the corporate media credibility is in such trouble, because people are looking at that and they're saying, it doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. And ultimately, in the situation in Yemen, the only solution really possible, Michael, is a political solution. And that seems to be so darn far away.
Well, the U.S. does not want a political solution. The U.S. wants their puppet regime to remain in power. And, of course, for the people of Yemen, their only solution is they want self-determination and sovereignty. But they may get it, because this whole push for a single global government is really starting to come apart. And yes, one of the reasons the U.S. went into all these countries and replaced their governments, or trying to replace their government, was to shackle those governments to the U.S. dollar. But there was another agenda, and that was to make sure that the leadership of all of these countries would willingly surrender their sovereignty to the New World Order when the time came. And now we have all these upstart countries, like Yemen does not want to have foreign puppet rule. Syria does not want to have foreign puppet rule. Libya doesn't want to have foreign puppet rule. Iraq is starting to fight back against foreign puppet rule. So is Afghanistan. China and Russia absolutely refuse to be part of a new world order. Great Britain looks like they're finally going to get the Brexit. And, of course, here in the United States, Donald Trump, whatever his other failings are, he is certainly not on board with joining the new world order.
Absolutely. I'd like to talk a little bit about Representative Haley's comments at the UN.
Yeah, and again, this may be Donald Trump's opening negotiating position to Russia, intending that Russia will negotiate back to what Donald Trump is already prepared to agree to.
My fingers are crossed.
Yeah, time will tell. Time will tell.
But Haley went on to tell the UN Council that U.S. sanctions on Russia will not be lifted until Crimea is returned to the Ukraine. And her narrative could not possibly have been more ham-fistedly, pig-headedly far from the truth. No one believes this. It's an idiotic premise. Russia never annexed Ukraine. And
You mean Crimea.
Crimea. And what happened was that there was a putsch that was developed by the U.S. and the IMF, European Union, to bring a more Russian-centric president out and installed Poroshenko. We'll get back to this.
All right, we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, what is your next story?
Well, I wanted to go a little further with Ambassador Haley's statement at the UN about Russia needing to give up Crimea. And apparently this lady has selective memory disorder on this issue, because I need to take her back to 2014 when the U.S., IMF, EU, NATO initiated a coup in Kiev, during which the more Russian-centric President Yanukovych was thrown under the bus, and the pro-Western puppet Poroshenko was installed in an election more crooked than a dog's hind legs. And Obama actually admitted this publicly. Washington was behind Ukraine coup. Obama admits that U.S. brokered a deal in support of regime change. I mean, that's out there. That's incontrovertible.
Yeah, and who was it who was bragging about how much money they'd spent to do?
Victoria Nuland.
That's
and
right,
you know
Victoria
something?
Nuland, yes.
Let's see. I think that Facebook has pulled it. But there are other places where you can still see the presentation where Nuland was talking about this $5 billion spent to regime change Kiev. You know.
Well,
and,
another one of Donald Trump's campaign promises, and it is out there, was he said that this era of covert tinkering with other countries was going to come to an end because it was causing a tremendous amount of harm to America's image around the world.
Yeah.
Now, this whole idea about Crimea is still part of the Ukraine, Russia stole it, is a very tortured piece of logic by the politicians. The thinking is that we don't recognize the Crimeans' referendum. Therefore, by default, Russia stole that land, which is kind of like imagining a father saying, I don't recognize my daughter's decision to marry this individual, therefore, by default, he kidnapped and raped her. That's a good analogy about what happened, even though all these nations who are saying we refuse to recognize Crimea's referendum are all members of the United Nations. And in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it says right there, every people have a right to sever ties with the government and go their own way. The right to self-determination is right in there.
Yeah, and it strikes me as deliciously ironic. Nikki Haley seems not to have a clue that that is part of the UN Charter at all. You know, she doesn't know.
Well, remember that boner from Al Sharpton the other day?
Oh, yeah.
Where he was out there saying Jesus was a refugee, he had to flee from Egypt. It's like these people don't even read what the foundation of their position is. Sharpton obviously hasn't read the Bible in a long while.
Nope.
Newland, as ambassador to the UN, hasn't read the UN Charter.
Not at all. And there was another article, I believe, in Global Research, which indicated that Haley's comments, it sounds like Samantha Powers never left the UN. Same old tired rhetoric.
Well, again, the job of the ambassador at the United Nations is to convey the message of the administration. So what Haley is saying at the UN is official policy coming from the White House. And again, if Trump really means it, it's a dangerous, dangerous sign. But again, he may be playing the Congress, acting like he's going to be this war hawk president so that they will confirm the remaining nominees of his administration. And again, based on Trump's own recommendations of how to conduct negotiations in the art of the deal, this could be his opening negotiating bid against Putin, to just go way, way, way past what he really wants and then let Putin negotiate back to what Trump is really ready to accept.
My fingers are crossed on that.
Yeah.
I would like to just briefly touch on that SEAL Team 6 attack in Yemen. Many women, many children were killed, and, you know, it was horrific. And, Mike, if I recall correctly, the killing of innocent non-combatants is considered a war crime?
Oh, of course it is.
Okay.
It always has been.
Yeah. And I am very uncomfortable with my country having become a proud partner complicit in the Saudi war crimes in Yemen, because that's what I'm looking at.
Well, you know, the hard part that we're all going to have to live with, actually, we're coming up on a commercial break, but I'm going to make this comment when we come on back, about the moral responsibility for all these crimes. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And Claire, take it away.
Putin made some observations on flare-ups or battles that are happening in eastern Ukraine. He made the observation that Kiev is trying to extort U.S. EU cash by playing the victim. And apparently the Kiev government provoked the latest escalation of violence in East Ukraine as it needs money from its Western partners, which is easier to achieve when a nation pretends to be a victim and facing aggression, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said.
Well, I don't think the West has any illusions who the aggressor and who the victim is in Ukraine, but it does provide political cover. But Ukraine is in serious financial trouble. They're heavily in debt. Much of the industrial base for Ukraine was in those breakaway republics.
Right, and Crimea.
Yes. And so obviously Poroshenko needs some kind of support, and certainly given how stingy the West has been bailing out countries who are the victims of bad banking practices, it makes it very politically difficult to just start pouring money all over Poroshenko unless he can get this war going.
Yeah.
And, of course, Poroshenko was put in there to provoke a war with Russia because ultimately the United States sees itself as in dire danger if the world continues to move away from using the U.S. dollar.
Right.
And, again, the government put itself in this hideous mess, and, frankly, I don't think Trump can get us out of it, certainly not by starting a world war that we're going to lose.
Yeah.
But we've lost most of our manufacturing. What we do make is expensive, deficient, planned to fail after the warranty goes on out. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture.
Right.
And the only thing that is holding up Wall Street right now are those nations which have to borrow Federal Reserve notes at interest to buy oil and other resources from countries who are constrained to sell those resources only for the U.S. dollar.
Right.
But more and more countries are moving away from that, and now Iran has said, as of March 31st, they're dropping the dollar in their oil trading. And the U.S. will say, well, we're going to put sanctions on your oil. You can't sell it to us. And Iran is going to say, that's fine. We'll sell it someplace else. A lot of people want our oil and are willing to pay currencies other than the dollar for it.
Michael, do you think that 31st of March date will be a drop-dead date by which the U.S. May make a move in terms of an invasion?
I think the U.S. is certainly going to see that as the drop-dead date.
Okay.
And I don't think they're even going to wait until March. It's going to happen this month. And they're going to have to gin up some kind of a corny excuse. You know, Iran has built a Death Star, or Iran has got a super germ, or some such nonsense. Or they could bomb the Super Bowl and say, see, it proves Iran has nuclear weapons.
Oh, man. You know, I will be very happy when the Super Bowl is over, safe and sound.
You could not get me into the city of Houston this weekend for any amount of money.
No. I'd like to bob on over to Australia. There has been this alleged kerfluffle between the Australian Prime Minister and Trump regarding the refugee resettlement from Australia. Now, Australia has a policy that no person who is not legitimately either a visitor or naturalized and is trying to get to Australia illegally will be allowed to be there. And they have been putting people on these islands, Nauru and Manus. And some of the things that Australia is concerned about, because President Trump said that, yes, he would accept the deal, but he's going to exact a very high price for it, possibly sending Australian troops to Iraq. And Trump defined this as a dumb deal, where the U.S. under Obama's administration said that Australia could offload these refugees to the United States.
Without vetting.
Without vetting, yeah. And Mr. Turnbull, who's the Prime Minister of Australia, will soon find out what the new president wants as a quid pro quo. And some of the people in Australia are concerned that the price, if you will, may be something as extreme as Australia sending more troops to Iraq or joining freedom of navigation patrols in the South China Sea.
I would see that one as far more likely.
Yeah.
And drag Australia into this mounting crisis.
Yeah.
You know, Trump may actually be buying into this. I'm sure his advisors are telling him, yes, the U.S. has gotten into these economic messes before, and every time we get into a world war, and that sorts everything out, which isn't even really accurate.
Right.
It sort of masks a domestic illness with a foreign fever. And what it really does do is result in more debt, and it's not going to work this time because we all know that that's the game going on. And the concern I have is that the U.S. is not well positioned to fight and win a war against Russia and China. Not just because our weapons seem to be breaking down as fast as they come off the slipways, but going back to The Art of War by Sun Tzu, where right in the front part of the book, he lists out all the things a leader must have to assure victory in a war. One of which is a military that believes in the moral rightness of the war so that they will fight fiercely and, if necessary, die in that war. The second thing is you have to have a civilian population that believes in the moral rightness of the war so that they will bear the hardships that war brings even to the victorious side. The United States has neither of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's funny with Turnbull. He didn't even look at the possibility that Trump would wind up, the president thought he would be negotiating the rest of this with Clinton, and someone in his cabinet should have warned him, sir, you are actually misreading the pulse of the American sentiment.
Turnbull was probably watching CNN International.
Yeah, absolutely.
Big mistake there.
Yes, definitely. We also have some escalation of warnings about North Korea. And the U.S. is warning North Korea of overwhelming response if they use nukes. Now, our new SecDef warned on Friday of an effective and overwhelming response if North Korea started using nuclear weapons.
That's kind of a given. Anybody who uses a nuclear weapon, the response is going to be intense, which is why nobody does it. And certainly why Iran is not a nuclear threat to anybody. Because Israel and the United States would turn them into a giant green glowing glass parking lot, send in the Marines to paint the stripes.
And Mathis was making these observations at South Korea's defense ministry at the end of a 2-day visit. Mathis' remark came amid concern that North Korea could be readying to test a new ballistic missile in what could be an early challenge for the Trump administration. And now North Korea does these threats on a pretty regular basis. And it did conduct more than 20 missile tests last year, as well as 2 nuclear tests, in defiance of UN resolutions and sanctions. Well, I have a memo to Secretary of Defense Mathis. There's an entirely different way of trying to deal with this, rather than threatening war, which will almost inevitably result in war with China, which, as you should know, the American military is woefully unprepared to cope with. It may be very useful for the U.S. government, China, to drop their collective bellicosity and work quietly behind the scenes with China and South Korea to get North Korea back to the negotiating tables to replace the armistice with a full-on peace treaty guaranteeing trade and freedom of navigation in exchange for stopping their nuclear weapons development program.
Well, see, there's a problem with that. It doesn't solve the primary problem of the world moving away from the U.S. dollar as the de facto international trade and banking currency. And that move is accelerating. And so the United States government is not going to be behind any policy that does not bring the world back under the U.S. dollar hegemonic domination, because that's the only way the United States can continue to keep its economy operating. And by the way, that economy will only be for the elites, Wall Street and the politicians. It won't do a thing for ordinary Americans. That's how dire the situation is.
No, I understand that. And we had a very interesting realization this morning that the new CIA deputy director briefly ran a black site in Thailand where detainees were waterboarded. Gina Haspel, who was once in charge of operating a CIA secret prison in Thailand, where at least 2 detainees were waterboarded and tortured, was selected by CIA Director Mike Pompeo to be the CIA's deputy director. Now, Pompeo has publicly pledged to keep his confirmation hearing, to keep the CIA out of the enhanced interrogation business. Haspel's appointment is really kind of an ominous development because it significantly increases the likelihood that the CIA will restore some torture techniques which were banned by President Barack Obama.
Or all of the eligible candidates for that position at one time or another were in charge of those water boards, because we don't really know how many of those black sites there were.
No.
And, you know, there could easily have been 2 or 3 dozen, and that's another possibility there. We do know that somebody claimed to have a draft executive order from Trump that he was going to reopen the sites, but the White House is saying that's more fake news.
Yeah.
And that's really what's making it very, very difficult right now. We here in the independent media, in a way, we're still dependent on information we're gleaning from other sources. And when those other sources are just openly trying to keep things as confusing as possible, it gets very difficult for everybody. NBC is under fire yet again for selectively editing a quote from former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani to make it look as if he were against Donald Trump's immigration freeze. And Giuliani was on board with that. So when the corporate media is lying like this, it's just clouding up the issue for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And apparently there were some videos of what she did that she ordered to have destroyed.
Well, if you're committing a war crime, wouldn't you destroy the evidence?
Yep, you know, but kind of makes me go, And another point...
Well, let's keep one thing in mind.
Yes.
There was a time in our recent history where the use of torture was sanctioned by the White House.
I know.
Certainly under George W. Bush. And so this lady may have just been obeying her orders, which doesn't exonerate her, because only obeying orders was used as an excuse at the Nuremberg trials, and they still hung most of those people, or hanged most of those people.
Yeah. Apparently, the Trump administration is now arming Kurdish fanatics, and the U.S. and Russia are floating a Kurdish autonomy in Syria and beyond. And apparently, while Trump's Syria plan has been pretty vague to this point, we are now seeing a position appearing to come into place. While it might not be as bad as what was called for under Obama and Clinton, the new approach to Syria is concerning, to say the least. Now, this is mainstream news, so we have to take it with a little bit of salt and probably a lot of cayenne pepper. There are reports that the administration is going ahead with a plan to arm Kurdish militants in Syria who are battling the Islamic State. Of course, these Kurds are interested in only one thing, their independence and the creation of their own Kurdish state that would eventually cross borders into Syria, Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. And
this sounds like another plan that Trump inherited from Obama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the one thing I'd say about it is trying to do something exactly the same way over and over and yet expecting a different outcome is a classical definition of insanity. And I hope that President Trump backs away from this, because it's very dangerous. And the other nations around there where the Kurdish state is allegedly going to be placed, they don't want to lose their sovereignty, and they don't want to be balkanized.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And it's made the situation very, very difficult. You know, there's another aspect to Donald Trump we need to keep in mind. Right now, as I said, he came into the White House with a worldview that is formed mostly of what he's been seeing on corporate media. And right now he's getting information from his daily intelligence briefing, which pretty much comes exclusively from the Central Intelligence Agency. And that daily intelligence briefing is a very powerful tool by which the CIA can manipulate the president.
Right, yeah.
So Trump needs to wake up and realize that there are no guarantees there. Remember how the CIA lied to John F. Kennedy?
Oh, yeah, Bay of Pigs.
For that whole Bay of Pig things,
Absolutely. Next thing I want to talk about is a company that wants farmers to keep using a poisonous pesticide. This comes to us from the Intercept.
From the insect's point of view, they're all poisonous.
I know.
Okay.
I know. Okay. It's called Poison Fruit, by way of Blacklisted News. And it talks about a family that wished that they could have protected their daughter from whatever originally caused her troubles, which began in infancy. This little girl just started screaming incessantly. As she got older, she was slow to talk and make friends. 9 years ago, when her pediatrician diagnosed her with autism, he told the Galindos that no one really knew why children develop such problems. That's a load of nonsense. And but now it's found out that this can create developmental problems with the systems of pregnant women and young children. And I think the executives who signed off on the development of this chemical should be tried for creating an environmental hazard to children and jailed for the rest of their lives and not in a club fed. Because the only way in the U.S. that safety standards will be rigorously imposed and this kind of developmental danger to children stopped. This shouldn't be allowed.
Well, one of the things I'm hoping is going to happen is that we know Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to do a legitimate job in charge of that Vaccine Safety Commission. And if we are correct in our assessment that Barron Trump is, in fact, suffering some degree of autism, Trump is going to be very much involved in this. And if Trump is confronted with absolutely irrefutable evidence that the vaccine corporations were doing this, knew they were doing it, covered it up to maximize profits, that might be Trump's Buddha on the road moment where he looks around at all these other government agencies and says, oh boy, we've got to do some firing around here.
Yeah, we've got problems.
They are not doing the job they're supposed to be doing. They're acting as industry salespeople and protectors and deflectors at the expense of the American people. And that is definitely going to have to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. There has to be moral responsibilities for the consequences of actions of people at the highest level of both government and corporations, and that's got to be just ironclad, Michael.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, the law right now does protect corporate executives. Well, we got to take a break for commercials. We're going to be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. The lines are closed here, so you've got one more story here real quick?
Yeah, and unfortunately I hate to end the end of the show on a rather unhappy note, but record high fatal radiation levels and a hole in the reactor have been detected at crippled Fukushima nuclear facility. A record high radiation level that's even lethal after a brief exposure has been detected at a damaged reactor at the Fukushima power plant in Japan. Specialists also found a hole likely caused by melted nuclear fuel. Radiation levels of up to 530 sieverts per hour were detected inside an inactive reactor 2 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear complex, damaged during the 2011 earthquake and tsunami catastrophe. And apparently this was reported yesterday, citing the plant operator Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO. A dose of about 8 sieverts is considered incurable and fatal.
Yes.
And a hole
pretty much cooked.
Yeah, a hole of no less than 1 square meter in size has also been discovered beneath the reactor's pressure vessel, TEPCO said. According to researchers, the apparent opening in the metal grating of one of the 3 reactors that melted down in 2011 is believed to have been caused by melted nuclear fuel that fell through the vessel. Michael, as you and I talked about earlier this morning, clearly there is uncontrolled fission going on underneath the reactors.
I think so, because it's deteriorating. And, of course, we have that other story where TEPCO has now declared an emergency because one of the remains of the reactor buildings is looking like it's starting to fall over into the ocean. And that could cause all kinds of problems depending upon what nuclear material remains in it. Because if you have all of this fissionable material surrounded by air, it's going to be kind of quiet. But remember, water is used as a neutron moderator in reactors to slow the neutrons to where they can be captured by neighboring fuel cells. So depending upon what's in it, we could actually see this reactor literally light up when it hits that water. And it is a mess. It is a mess. And I think we have something like 22 power stations here in the United States of America that are using that exact same General Electric reactor design. Yeah, and it looks like TEPCO, with their shoddy ways of building this and their signing off on, value engineering, has put the world almost at an ELE or extinction level event. Well, it's certainly toxified the Pacific Ocean, and I think one of the reasons that there's so much concern over safe, healthy food is there may simply not be enough to feed the current human population.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we're coming up on the end of the show. I meant earlier when we were talking about the war where the U.S. is sending all these weapons to be used against innocent people in Yemen. The gun grabbers always like to claim that the manufacturers and distributors of the weapons share the moral blame for the bad things done with them. Let's take them at their word and realize that we, the American people, by allowing our government to commit these war crimes, we do share that moral responsibility for that. So we're gonna halt at this point. We're coming into Super Bowl weekend, and I understand Mike Pence is going to be there, and hopefully it'll be a fun game for all parties involved. So we're going to head on out, get something useful done with the rest of the day. Claire and I have got lots of things we need to get to, and we'll be back on Monday here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. So have a great Super Bowl weekend, and aloha, America.